And then, oh, perfect. Okay, yay. Folks are joining. Thank you so much for being here, y'all, and for being on time. Just, as a reminder for folks, y'all are anonymous. So we, on our end, we can see your names, but camera and audio is off. You'll still be able to interact with us and ask your questions. There'll be a Q&A box in the bottom of your screen. So if you have questions now or throughout the presentation, feel free to drop them in there. Also, feel free to chat with us in there as well. The chat, I think, is disabled for all of you, but I will still be using it to send you the links to resources as Silvia covers them and just as they come up in the presentation. But thank you all so much for joining. We're going to start our webinar at 4:05 to give folks a chance to log in. And I'll go ahead and drop this in the chat so I don't have to keep repeating myself. Awesome. Alrighty, thank you to everyone who is here early and on time. We really appreciate it. Just for clarity, this is the Financial Aid and Wellness Overview presentation by Silvia Marquez from UC Berkeley Financial Aid Office. My name is Katia. You might have gotten a call from me not too long ago confirming if you're still going to be able to make it to our webinar today. So I'm glad to see so many people here. We really appreciate your support. And yeah, just a couple more minutes before we start. As a reminder as well for our attendees, we'll be doing a raffle at the end for a $50 just raffle prize for anyone who stays until the end. So definitely, if you're able to, hang tight and hang out until the end. We'd love to also answer your questions at the end as well, so that we don't disrupt the flow of the presentation. But yeah, if anyone has questions, let us know. Otherwise, we'll give it just a couple more minutes. Alrighty, looks like we're going to give it one more minute. I would expect folks to continue to trickle in, as these first few minutes go by as well. But yeah, definitely thank y'all for being here. And thank you for your patience as we wait for more folks to join. This webinar is also being recorded, and the recording will be available on our Central Valley Scholars YouTube channel either the day before or not the day before, the day after this is finished, so that y'all can rewatch it and access it as many times as you need to direct your communities to it as well, if that's a resource that you think they could benefit from. Alrighty, it's 4:05 exactly, so we can go ahead and get started. Again, this is the Financial Aid and Wellness Overview presentation led by Silvia Marquez, she, her, ella pronouns, the Associate Director of Financial Aid at UC Berkeley. My name is Katia, my pronouns are she, her, ella, and I am the Events Coordinator for Central Valley Scholars. Silvia, if you wouldn't mind going to the next slide, please. Thank you so much. So just in case folks who are joining us today aren't super familiar with our organization or want to learn a little bit more about us, Central Valley Scholars is here to empower students to realize their potential and capabilities and directly provide the resources, guidance, and support that they need in order to make their education dreams a reality. We value and understand that every student has their own pathway to education, and we want to reimagine and rebuild our classrooms, programs, workshops, universities, and more to more directly accommodate the individual needs of our students. We currently have a lot of different programs running, such as our Mentor, Mentee program. We have a first gen mentorship program and a Black mentorship program that is intended to give one-on-one support to students, to a limited number of students, to make sure they know how to do their FAFSA, know how to do their different college applications, and just giving, holding their hand through that process. These webinars are available to anyone, and we really just wanted to create community resources for folks and make it something that y'all can revisit if you need assistance. You can learn more about us as well at centralvalleyscholars.org. If you're interested, you can also sign up for our newsletter there as well. Yeah, if you wouldn't mind going to the next slide. Thank you so much. Awesome. So to learn about some of our upcoming events and workshops that are happening, y'all can visit this link, centralvalleyscholars.org/workshops. I will also send it again either right after this or at the end of the presentation for y'all to check it out and see the upcoming webinars that we have happening. We'll be focusing November's efforts on just college apps, talking, having folks join us from UC admissions boards, from some private schools to talk about the Common App, as well as hopefully a transfer student experience webinar to cover all of y'all's needs during that month of just like full of stress and college applications. Hopefully we can answer some questions and be a resource to y'all. Yeah, go ahead and go on to, oh, perfect, thank you. Alrighty, so before we get started today, this is actually a new practice that Central Valley Scholars is trying to implement in order to ground us and inform us in the work that Indigenous peoples across California, across the United States, ground us in the work and the organizing that they started and that they continue to do right. This is, I think, something that we don't see often in the Central Valley, which is why we wanted to start doing it in our online webinars so that folks can become more familiar with what a land acknowledgement is, and we can just bring awareness to it, hopefully, and improve on this as we go along as well. But for now, I know everyone already has their audio and visuals off, but I encourage y'all to just plant your feet on the ground, take a few deep breaths, close your eyes if you need to get comfortable in the space that you're in. And I'm going to read off this land acknowledgement. I want us to take a moment to acknowledge where we are, that the earth below our homes and below our feet is Indigenous territory and has belonged to and been tended to by the Indigenous peoples of this land for hundreds of thousands of years. When white settlers arrived to what we otherwise know as the United States, they enacted genocide and theft of the land, labor, and resources, attempting to wipe out Indigenous communities entirely. It's important to acknowledge the land we're living on and to recognize our history and relationship to the ongoing legacy of colonization in the US, and to also recognize that the Indigenous people are still here and through resistance and resilience are still on the front lines, struggling for land rights, collective liberation, and an end to white supremacy. I invite you to take a moment and to think about your relationship to this land and its history. Let's let those who came before us inform us on where we're going, so that together we can reimagine and collectively build a world where we're all free. I know we're all in different, geographies, given that this is a digital format. We actually had some folks joining us from way outside of the Central Valley, which is awesome news. We're glad we're able to reach y'all. But again, the whole purpose of the land acknowledgement is, again, what it says here is to be informed by Indigenous folks who occupied these lands before us. I personally am in the Fresno County area right now, which is Yokurts territory. I'll also be sending out some resources about what land acknowledgements are, more about where, how to determine which territory you're on right now, and some recommended readings about this for anyone who's interested. I'll send those out shortly. But Silvia, if you could go to the next slide. Awesome. So I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to Silvia to let her introduce herself. And I'm going to be having my video and audio off for the rest of this presentation, but I'll be back at the end to kind of sift through your questions in the Q&A box and help Silvia navigate that. I'll be dropping links in the chat. If anyone has questions, I think because I called all y'all, you should hopefully have my number, but also feel free to use the Q&A for questions maybe not related to the presentation. I can answer those as well. And just a brief little disclaimer about why we always introduce ourselves with pronouns. Pronouns are what we want folks to refer to, how we want folks to refer to us in terms of like our gender identity. So I'm a cis woman, so I use she, her, ella. That's what I'm comfortable with. That's what I prefer. And yeah, okay, looks like All right, we're all settled in. So I'm gonna go ahead and pass it off to Sylvia. Thank you so much for being here, by the way. And yeah, I'll go ahead and let you take it from here.
Great, thank you so much, Katya. As Katya said, my name is Silvia Marquez. I use she, her, a as my pronouns. I am an Associate Director of Financial Aid and Scholarships at UC Berkeley. I'm also a Berkeley alum. I am from the Central Valley. I grew up in Stockton, California, and my family is still in the Central Valley. So I am particularly excited about being here with you today because you all live in my home area, and I'm incredibly proud of that. And so I'm glad that I was able to make the connection with Central Valley Scholars and that they asked me to join you today. We have a lot of information that we're going to cover today. So please use the Q&A so we can get to your questions at the end in case I'm going a little too fast or there are terms that aren't familiar. Please put those questions in the chat so that we can get to them at the end. And I want to go ahead and get started and talk a little bit about what the goals are for today. I want to give you general information about financial aid, how to apply, what the general timeline is. Depending on the schools that you're applying to, you may need to do a little bit of research, but this will at least give you some foundation on how the aid process works. We'll talk about how schools determine financial need, because this is important around how we award aid and how much and the types. I want to talk about affordability as well, because it's really critically important. If there's only one thing you walk away with today, it's that it's better to have the information. Please don't self-select out and assume that you can't afford to go to college. Go through the process and get all the information first before you make that decision. So we'll talk a bit about that. We'll talk about typical financial aid awards that are available to students that apply using the applications we'll talk about. It's also really important right now to talk about appeals in special circumstances, given the economic crisis that this country is in right now, and quite frankly, the world. It's really important for you all to know what can change in your financial aid awards if you have extenuating circumstances. So we'll talk about that. And then resources and reminders at the end, because we'll give you a lot of information. So it's going to be really important that I just kind of reinforce a few things, and then we'll have time for questions. Okay, so let's get going. Let's talk about the general information and the timeline first. So, oops, I missed one here. Okay, so really basic. What is financial aid? I think when students and families think about financial aid, you're usually thinking about the first two boxes, which are grants and scholarships. And really, financial aid encompasses much more than that. Schools may offer work study, they may offer loans, and we'll get into that a little bit later in the presentation. I just want to be clear in the foundation that financial aid really means grants, scholarships, loans, work study. So it's a combination of all of these things, and they are used to help you pay for your educational expenses. And when you apply, it's really for 1 year at a time. So just know that that's the basis of what makes up financial aid. So let's talk a little bit about how to apply in the timelines. So let's go ahead and talk about what are the applications typically used, and especially for public institutions that are typically used by universities. So if you, the student, are a citizen or a permanent resident of the United States, you would use the FAFSA, or the free application for federal student aid. You hear it condensed or shortened into FAFSA, and that's the first application here at the top. If you are an undocumented student within California and you qualify for in-state residency, you may have heard the term AB 540, which is the Assembly Bill 540, that allows with certain requirements for undocumented California students to be eligible for in-state tuition. If that's you, then you would use the California DREAM Act application to apply for financial aid within California. And then in addition to that, what we ask students to do from California specifically is complete a Cal Grant GPA verification form. And it's really important to do that so that you are availing yourself of all of the types of financial aid available to you, including a Cal Grant, which could help you with tuition. One thing I did want to show you about the Cal Grant specifically is, if I can get to it here, is the requirement for Cal Grant around income and assets. So there are income maximums and household size that play into your eligibility for Cal Grant, and I'm having a little bit of trouble getting to it. So I may just get out of this altogether. So Katya, I'm having a little bit of trouble getting to it. Maybe we can get to it at the end when I'm not presenting. Is that okay?
Yeah, I think that's fine. And if you wanted to too, you can always like minimize your screen or like do the escape button and open it up.
Okay.
But I can also share these with folks in the chat as well.
Actually, let me do that. There we go. Perfect. Thank you for that. So if we had clicked on this Cal Grant link, it takes you to the Cal Grant page. And what's really important here is that these are the income and asset ceilings that might play into whether you're eligible for a Cal Grant or not. And so if we clicked on this, for example, which are the eligibility requirements for the 21-22 academic year, it would take you to this document. And this is really helpful in trying to understand, would I even be eligible for a Cal Grant? Would they consider me? So really what it's looking at, if you are a dependent student, let's say your household size is 4. So your family's income would need to be under $110,400 to be eligible for a Cal Grant A or C, and it's lower for a Cal Grant B. But if you fall within these criteria, there's a possibility that you could be eligible for a Cal Grant. The other factor in considering Cal Grants, if you're a dependent student again, is there's an asset ceiling. So as you go through the aid application, it's going to ask for income and asset information for you as well as your parent if you're dependent. And so this is the number. If your assets are beyond this, you may not be eligible for a Cal Grant. This is just useful information to have. We don't expect you to figure this out on your own. Again, it is a resource that could be useful to you because we know that financial aid and how we determine eligibility can be a bit of a challenge to figure out, and we don't want it to be a mystery. And so if you're applying for financial aid for the next academic year, so if you're applying for admission for fall 2021, your aid application is available now. They become available on October 1st. So it just became available 16 days ago. So you can start now, even if you're not sure which schools you're going to apply for admission, you can start the process now. It's always good to give yourself enough time to be able to do the aid application. And one particular group of students that I would suggest start earlier and need maybe a little more time, we know we have students that whose families have mixed status. And so if we have a student who is a US citizen or permanent resident, but maybe the parents are undocumented, you would file a FAFSA. But to complete the application, your parent may need to physically sign a piece of paper that you have to mail to the Department of Education for processing. That can take longer. We know that mail has been impacted since we've been in the pandemic. And so it's always good to give yourself more time, start the process earlier so that you give yourself time to mail that in and time for the Department of Education to process it. So earlier is better. For California, the deadline for your aid application and the Cal Grant is March 2nd. It's March 2nd every year. And so it's important to make sure that you sort of burn that date into the back of your head because you will be applying for aid each year and it's always March 2nd. But it's important to know that that deadline can vary from state to state. So if you're thinking about applying to a school out of state, go to the aid application website and look up the date. And I say that because, for example, if you're thinking about Arizona, their deadline is March 1st. And so you don't want to miss out on anything. So make sure you're paying attention to those dates. The other thing to know is that some institutions may have earlier deadlines. So it's always good to research each of the colleges that you're thinking about applying to for any additional aid applications they may have. They may have a scholarship application that is separate. That is not true for the UC system, but it could be true for a private institution. And so it's always good to go look at the individual school website and deadlines. For some schools, if you apply earlier, you may receive more aid. Again, that is not necessarily true for Berkeley, but it could be true for other schools, depending on how much university grant and scholarship they have to award. So the deadlines are really important. If you are using a FAFSA, we encourage you to use what is a tool within the FAFSA called the IRS Data Retrieval Tool. And really what this does is it takes the guesswork out of the application because you will be using yours and your parents' tax returns from 2019. And instead of trying to figure out, is it line 6 and line 7 numbers that I need to put into the FAFSA, the IRS Data Retrieval Tool can pull that information directly from the IRS and make the process a little bit easier for you. As you go through, it'll populate for you. So it can help you down the road once you figure out which school you're going to attend, and maybe you might be asked for more documentation. Using the IRS Data Retrieval Tool makes that a little bit simpler as you go through. So let's move on. We often get questions from our students about who maybe the parents are not in the same household. So which parent do I use? And I wanted to put this in here because it's a common question that we get. And so a few kind of rules of thumb to know is if your parents are divorced or separated, the rule of thumb is to use the parent that you lived with the most over the last 12-month period. We know that doesn't answer all the questions. And so if you're splitting your time pretty much evenly between your parents, then the next sort of way to figure out which parent to use is which parent provided more support during the last 12-month period and financial support. So if you can figure that out from those two things, that would be the way to go. If your parent is remarried, it's important to know that you do need to include the step parent in the household and in the income information. And that holds true regardless of whether there was an agreement between your parent and your step parent when they got married. The Department of Education and the Student Aid Commission, that is not something that they will consider up front. So just know that you need to put in that information on your aid application. Let's go on to the next slide. So the other question we get a lot from our students is, well, you know, I make a certain amount of money, I file my own taxes, I'm independent, I don't have to include my parent information. And that's not necessarily true. And so it's a myth that's out there. And so I want to make sure that this information is clear for you. So these are the questions on the aid applications, both of them, that determine whether a student is going to be independent and not require parent information, or whether you are dependent and do need to provide parent information. So it's really looking to see if you are over a certain age, 23, 24, are you married? Are you a graduate student? Are you a veteran? Have you ever been in foster care or a ward of the court as determined by a court? Are you in legal guardianship, again, as determined by a court in your state? We also have students that are challenged with basic needs like housing and food. And so if this applies to you, if you are a homeless student or we're self-supporting or at risk of being homeless, then you would say yes. So these are the questions, depending on how you answer them, will determine which questions you answer next on the aid application. But just know these are the things, not so much how much you make or whether you file your own taxes or whether your parent claimed you on their tax return. All right, let's keep going. So now you know a little bit about how to apply for financial aid. So let's talk a little bit about what happens once we get your aid application and what we do with all of that information, because it's important. So how do we determine whether a student is financially needy or not? And so what we do is we take the cost of attendance, which I will show you an example of shortly, and we subtract out the expected family contribution. We'll talk a little bit about what the expected family contribution means on the next slide. But we do some math, take away the family contribution from the cost of attendance, and that tells us how much financial need you have. And this number is really important for us, along with the EFC, because it helps us figure out how much and what types of financial aid you need to pay for your educational expenses for 1 year. Okay, so let's talk about your EFC. And that's how we'll refer to it. You'll hear a lot of aid administrators and admissions officers talk about EFC. It's your expected family contribution. And really what it is, it's a measure of your family's financial strength. And we determine this number using a federal formula that's established in law. The state of California for the DREAM Act application uses the same formula. And really what we've done is taken the information that you put on the aid application for both you and your parent. So the income and asset information, number of people in the household, how many are in college, how old your older parent is, their assets, all of that. We take all of that and plug it into a formula to come up with this number. So again, the EFC is partly your parent information, it's partly your information. One thing that's really important to know about the EFC is that it should be the same at every school you apply to. What will be different is how much it costs at each school, but the EFC, this number should be the same at every school you apply to, because remember, it is one aid application that you're going to be using. So that number should be the same wherever you go. What the EFC isn't is also really important, because I think this can create some confusion for our students and families. What the EFC is not, it's not the amount of money that you have to pay for college. You know, a lot of families think, well, my EFC is, you know, $5,000. Is that how much I have to pay? Not necessarily. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. It's also not the amount of money you're going to receive from a college or a university. So if your EFC is 0, that does not mean that you're not going to get any financial aid. So it's important to know that. And then, like I said before, just remember that the EFC should be the same at each campus, not different. Okay, so it's important to know those things. So in the financial need formula, we've talked about EFC, but now I want to talk a little bit about the estimated cost of attendance, which was part of that formula. So what is a cost of attendance? Really what this means, in more simplistic non-financial aid terms, is that it is your budget for one academic year. It is how we determine how much financial aid you're potentially going to need, or what it could cost for one academic year. And what goes into this cost of attendance is there are expenses that the university will charge you for directly, like tuition. Those are direct costs. There are also indirect costs in the cost of attendance. So we know that you need money for food, for example. We at the university are not going to charge you for that, but it is an expense that you're going to have as a student, right? And so there are direct and indirect costs. We put those together and come up with a cost of attendance. The cost of attendance can vary drastically from school to school. Attending a community college versus a CSU versus a UC versus a private school, and the location of those schools will definitely have an impact on the overall cost of attendance or your budget, what you might need for one academic year. So again, it's really important to do your homework across the different schools that you're applying to. This is also tends to be the number that gives students sort of that sticker shock, and families that sticker shock feeling like, oh my goodness, 1 year at Berkeley in the residence hall could cost, you know, $42,000. And so I don't want that to be the feeling that you have by the time we're done with this presentation. This is just one piece of the formula. But it's important to know what goes into the cost of attendance. So I talked about direct expenses and indirect expenses. So some direct expenses, again, tuition and fees, because everybody's got to pay tuition and fees when you enroll. If you live on campus and you might be paying the university directly, that could be a direct cost for some students. Health insurance. Many institutions require health insurance. So if you don't have your own, you may need to purchase theirs. And so that could also be a direct expense to students. This is where students and families have a bit more control over what goes into the cost of attendance, which is the lower section here: housing, food, book supplies, personal transportation. So if you're not living on campus, where you live, how much rent you pay, you have a little more control over that. Food, for example, again, if you're not living in a residence hall, do you eat out all the time, or are you buying in bulk at a particular store so that you can eat at home and it could be cheaper? Books and supplies, depending on your major. You may need more books or newer books or different software, whatever that might look like. For other majors, maybe not so much. Maybe you can access all of your resources online. So this is an area where you have some control over the expenses. So it may or may not cost the total cost of attendance. You may not need that much. So again, this is really more informational. Don't let it be the thing that stops you from applying to a particular institution. One other thing that's important to note here is that our out-of-state students, so if we have students that are not residents of California, their parents are not residents of California, if you're a dependent, there may be an additional cost at public institutions. And so for UC Berkeley, for example, our out-of-state students who are not residents of California would take that bottom line number at the bottom and add another $29,754 for the non-resident supplemental tuition. One important thing to know is if you're applying to a private institution, so some that I can think of off the top of my head are like Stanford, they do not have in-state, out-of-state tuition. Okay, they have one set cost for tuition. Doesn't matter whether you are from California or not. The out-of-state additional expense, again, applies to public institutions. So know that, please, going forward. Okay. So now we've looked at the whole formula. We've looked at the cost of attendance. We know what the EFC is, right? It's the expected family contribution. So now we have kind of figured out what your financial need is because you've done the application. So let's talk about what kind of awards you might be eligible for now that we've done all of that. So some typical financial aid awards are listed here, and they're by category, right? So there are federal financial aid awards that include things like a federal Pell Grant, SEOG, which stands for Supplemental Educational Opportunity Grant. There's work study, and we'll spend a little bit of time talking about work study because many of our students do work while they are in college. And then there are loans as well. And I do want to talk a little bit about loans a little bit later because at public institutions, it is not uncommon for you to see loans in your financial aid package. I don't want that to be a scary thing either. State aid, we talked a little bit about Cal Grant. We'll spend a little more time on that. Middle class scholarship, which is also a state grant that can help you with tuition. Chafee grants, so if you are a foster youth or former foster youth, this may be something that you may be eligible for that can really assist you with your expenses. And then Dream Loan, there is a loan for our Dream students who file the Dream Act application. Institutional aid, there are lots of different types of institutional aid. This will vary, and the reason there's an asterisk here is this will vary institution by institution. Go ahead, Katya.
Hi, Sylvia. Okay, so I just wanted to test out, does my audio sound okay to you?
It's a little bit choppy. Is
okay,
mine?
I think it might be my headphones, and I wanted to verify with you. So go ahead and keep speaking. If someone could let us know in the Q&A box if you hear everything fine, you don't have to say anything. But if someone is having trouble hearing and making out the words, let me know in the Q&A box. I think it might just be me. So you're good to continue.
Okay, thank you. So institutional aid, as I was saying, could vary from school to school. And so this might, if some schools have more university grant and scholarship than others, that might be one reason that they have an earlier application deadline. So it's always good to check the website so that you're not missing out on anything that you might be eligible for there. And then there are always private resources, and I can't emphasize this enough. Outside scholarships are going to be really, really important as you think about how to finance your education, especially if you're thinking that you don't want to borrow loans or really want to keep that to a minimum, which I agree with. And work study. If you're thinking, maybe I don't know if I can work right away, outside scholarships are going to be really important. And certainly looking or speaking with employers, community organizations. Private loans are an option. They're listed here. Really are totally 100% your last resort, and I don't recommend them if you absolutely do not need them. And 529 plans as well are also a resource. So let's get into this a little bit more. I think we looked at this already, so I might have gone a little too soon on the Cal Grant requirement, but Cal Grants are grants that are awarded by the California Student Aid Commission. So again, by filing your FAFSA or your DREAM Act application by March 2nd, and your Cal Grant GPA verification form that your current high school or community college can help you with. Those are the things you need to be considered for this. We looked already at the income and asset requirements. Assets typically, I saw this in the Q&A. Assets typically are your cash, savings, investments, stock, property, larger businesses, farms. Those sorts of things are considered assets, but all of those are clearly defined in the application. Your GPA is also a requirement. You do need to meet a threshold, which is 3.0 for a Cal Grant A or 2.0 for a Cal Grant B. And then California residency, right, is another one that you must meet the requirement for, and the university that you attend or the college that you attend will help determine whether you are a California resident or not. And what this link does, it takes you to the document that we were looking at earlier on the income and asset slide. I want to talk a little bit about middle class scholarship. So we saw the income cutoffs for Cal Grant, but let's say, for example, you still have financial need and maybe you don't meet the Cal Grant income requirement or the asset ceiling. There is an additional state grant that can assist our students that don't meet the lower income requirements. Again, filing your FAFSA or your DREAM Act application is critical here. But for those households that have higher income, up to $184,000 and their assets up to $184,000, you might be eligible for a middle class scholarship. This award is also determined by the Student Aid Commission of California. And what it is it's awarded on a sliding scale. So the higher your income, the smaller the award. And it only covers up to 40% of the total tuition, of system-wide fees and tuition. So for a UC, for example, 40% of our total system-wide tuition is $5,028. And that's what that number refers to. So again, important for you to file the aid application. Don't assume you won't be eligible for anything, because even $5,000, having that for 1 year could make a difference for you. But just know that this is something that's available for middle income families. I want to talk a little bit about the outside scholarship search. So as I mentioned, it's, outside scholarships make a huge difference, especially on my campus. Our students at Berkeley bring in over $10 million a year in outside scholarships. And what that does for our students is 65% of our undergraduate students don't borrow loans. And part of the reason that they don't borrow is because they have so much in outside scholarships. It's important to know what each institution, how they treat outside scholarships that you bring in with you when you come to their campus. And what I mean by that is, so on the Berkeley campus, as an example, our commitment to our students is, if you have a subsidized loan in your financial aid package, or you have work study in your financial aid package, plus your grants and scholarships, we are going to reduce your loans and your work study dollar for dollar for these outside scholarships that you bring in, before we're going to reduce any university grant. We won't touch a Cal Grant or a Pell Grant. Not all schools do that. And so it's important, that's what this first statement here is. It's important to know how your institution treats outside scholarships. And that is a totally fair question that you should ask each school that you are applying to, or research it on their website. Because what you don't want to have happen is that you bring in an outside scholarship and they're just taking their grant or scholarship back, right? Like, that's not helping you. We want to help you maximize all of your free dollars to make this as affordable for you as possible. So ask that question. Where do you start? Start with your high school, community college, your employers, again, community organizations. There's money out there. Coca-Cola just launched their scholarship. They give away a ton of money. We know that Gates Millennium gives away a lot of money. So there's a lot of money out there. You just have to do the homework. Please don't ever pay anybody to provide this information for you. You are paying for information that is free. Make it your part-time job between now and when you graduate from college. Spend 30 minutes or an hour every day or every month looking for scholarships, and do it now. I encourage you to start now for the next academic year. Don't wait until you have college decisions about admission. It's too late. So start now as soon as you can. These are just some places that you might be able to start a scholarship search. So if any of you have been on the College Board website, look at Big Future. They have a great scholarship engine, search engine available as well. So affordability. I do want to spend some time and I want to be really transparent. I don't want people to be afraid, and I want to have an honest conversation. So my job as an aid administrator, and any aid administrator on a campus will tell you, our job is to be your partner. We want you to be on our campus, and we don't expect you to know this process or what the rules are, what the requirements are. That's our job. And so really what we ask of you and your family is to provide the aid information on the aid application. We ask you to do all the aid applications that are available to you, including outside scholarships. And it's our job to make sure we can put all of that together for you in a way that is affordable, in a way that you can understand, and that you can use to help make your decision about where you want to go to school. Okay, so that's our job. It's really important to know also the difference between public and private institutions and how we award financial aid differently. And so it does vary from school to school, as I said before. How Berkeley awards grants and scholarships is based on merit and need. But that may not be true at other institutions. At some schools, it could just be merit. It could just be GPA or test scores, or if you apply to an art school, it could be your portfolio, it could be your athletic ability, it could be any number of things. And so it's important to know, that you do your research from school to school to figure that out. We encourage you to compare and negotiate offers. And I put if possible there. And I say that because that may not be possible at a public institution versus a private institution where they may have a larger endowment and more money to be able to grant you a comparable or a similar package as another school. Public institutions do not have endowments typically that are that large. So if you get an offer from us and say UC Davis and they gave you a better package, we're not going to be able to just adjust your awards. So it's worth asking the question for sure. And I encourage you to do that, but just know that it may not be possible at some schools. And then be prepared to see loans and work in your financial aid package, especially at public institutions. Again, if we could fund everybody up to financial need with grants and scholarships, we would. We're just not in that position financially as public institutions. So know those differences. And don't assume, so we talked a little bit about net cost and the cost of attendance and sort of sticker shock. Comparing a school based on the cost of attendance from one school to another is not the way to decide whether you can afford a school or not. Really, what you want to use to compare school to school is the net cost. Well, what does that actually mean? So the net cost is we take the cost of attendance. So if you remember, we looked at the Berkeley chart, and that was about $42,000 if you're in the dorm. You take that number, you subtract out the amount of grants and scholarships that we are offering you. And whatever that bottom line number is, that's the number that you want to compare from school to school, because that is the amount that you might be offered in loans and work study. It might be the amount that you have to pay out of pocket if you're not going to borrow, those sorts of things. So that's the number you want to use, not the whole cost of what it could be for 1 year. So, and there is a way for you to figure out what that cost might be. And I'll show you how to do that. And I think that that's not necessarily the way that folks understand financial aid to work, but this is, the net cost is the way to compare apples to apples once you start getting your financial aid offers back. So I want to give you an example. And this is one that always creates a lot of questions. So I want to be really clear. When I did this comparison, I was assuming that I was a dependent student, so under the age of 24, and I live with my parents. And we are very low income, so a zero family contribution. And in each of these scenarios, I would be living off campus by myself, not with my family. So those are the parameters for what we're looking at here. So for Berkeley, for example, what it could cost for 1 year is $40,700, right? We saw that earlier on the slide. Versus a CSU. And for these purposes, I picked CSU East Bay because it's closest in terms of geographic location, because I wanted the cost to be somewhat similar in terms of living. And then I also picked a community college. I believe I picked Diablo Valley College. So you can see that the total cost of attendance, right, is lower if you go to a community college and live on your own. That's not surprising, okay? You can see what the biggest expenses are in each of these examples. So for UC, tuition is higher for sure, right? But room and board is higher. Looking at these, you're still gonna have room and board expenses in these other two scenarios, right? The difference, however, is Berkeley can offer a lot more in grants and scholarships than maybe a CSU, and definitely a lot more than a community college, right? So if we take the cost of attendance, subtract out the grants and scholarships that you're awarded, that's how we come up with the net cost for each type of institution. I'm waiting for that little bar at the bottom to go away so we can see the numbers. So at a UC, a net cost could be $10,000 out of that $40,000 estimate, right? So we're offering quite a bit in grants and scholarships versus a CSU that may not have quite as much money as the UC, and then a community college where the only free portion of your budget might be your tuition and fees, maybe a little bit more, but the net cost at a community college could actually be higher than it would be at a UC. This also holds true if you are a low-income student that, say, applies to a private institution that has a very large endowment, like a Stanford or a Harvard. They might be able to cover the whole thing in grants and scholarships. And so if you're a low-income student, going to one of those schools might actually be the best financial choice, even though it's the most expensive. And so it's just important to know these things as you're going through. I hope this is helpful. I know it's a lot, but really the net cost is the key in making decisions. How do you get these numbers? Every school that awards federal financial aid has something called a net price or net cost calculator. Go to their website, search for net cost calculator, net price calculator, or just type in calculator. You're going to find it. You enter your information as accurately as possible, and it will give you some sense of what it could cost and what you could be eligible for. So I encourage you to do that. This is a great resource. This is an example of what ours looks like. They're all different. Some of the information is more up to date than others, but there is something out there for you to use. And so just remember that it is an estimate, and remember that it's only as good as the information that you put into it. So try to be as accurate as you can be, but it's helpful. So again, public institutions, please don't be shocked if you see loans in your financial aid package. Right now, the interest rates are really low. Usually what you're seeing here and what you'll see in your financial aid package is your loans are listed in the best order possible. So subsidized loans are the kind that don't accrue interest while you're in school. Unsubsidized do accrue interest while you're in school, as do Parent Plus loans. We don't encourage you to borrow unless you absolutely have to, but it's important to know how low the rates are. Right now, they will change by next fall, but it's important to know how low they are. They typically don't change a whole lot. They tend to stay in the 2 to 4% range for students. We encourage you to create a budget. So take your budget, what you think you might spend for a year, subtract out all your grants and scholarships, and then decide, do I need to borrow to cover whatever's left over? Or do I have enough in grants and scholarships and maybe I don't need to borrow at all? And what are my other options? Maybe I don't need to borrow, but I would rather work and try and pay for some of these expenses. Maybe I have outside scholarships. That's where those other awards or options come into play. Spending some time looking for a work study job is always really helpful. Lots of opportunities on and off campus, depending on the university. Our dream students, if you're eligible to work under DACA, it's important to check with the institution to see if they have work study available for you as well. On our campus, we do. And so it's important to do that search. You are a student first. but there are opportunities to work, and we don't encourage our students to work more than 10 hours a week if they are working. And finding something that you're interested in or allows you to maybe do some reading while you're at work, all of those things are possibilities. Maybe you want to do some research and that's part of your work study. All of it is really, really helpful and good experience for you. This is an example of where you might be able to find more information. This is our website, but each institution should have information on work study and a career center. So maybe you don't want to do work study, but want to find other jobs or need interviews, skills built up or resume, try the career centers on your campuses as well. And again, apply for outside scholarships. You do need to report your outside scholarships to the university that you're going to attend. So if you win $5,000 from Coca-Cola, you do need to let us know because we need to make an adjustment to your package. Again, how that happens is different at each school, but for us, for example, it would be subsidized loans and work study first that we reduce, but you are required to report them. They cannot take the place of your family contribution. So know that ahead of time as well. And this is a website where you can start. We have a lot of search engines on our website. This is one place that you can start. All right, appeals in special circumstances. We're running out of time. So I am going to talk quickly. And Katya, if you think we're not going to make it, let me know. So we know that, oops, let me go back. One more. We know that things are changing for families right now. We know that 40 million people are out of jobs. And so we know that income has changed drastically. And so it's important to know that you don't want to make these changes yourself on your aid application. You want to reach out to the individual schools that you are applying to and asking them how they consider individual circumstances. For us, the things that we consider, and most schools do, are a reduction or a loss of employment, which means loss of income. Your parents might have had access to some untaxed income that they no longer do. That's important for us to know as well. There could be a change in marital status in your household. So that's definitely important for us to know because it can change the resources in that household. There could be unusual or necessary expenses. So what we find here, for example, often are families that are impacted by natural disasters or overwhelming medical expenses that are out of pocket. Those are typically the kinds of things that we can consider. So if those are happening for you, contact the institutions directly to find out how to appeal. The other thing I will say is we have many students who have unusual or extreme circumstances at home. And so maybe you aren't quite able to say yes to any of the independence questions on the aid application, but you still have an extreme or unusual circumstance. It's important that you reach out to the institutions that you're going to apply to directly to ask them about an independence appeal process. These are evaluated case by case, campus by campus. What they require you to provide will also vary campus to campus. And just because you apply does not mean it's going to be approved. If you apply at one school and they approve it, it does not carry forward to the next school. So you may have to go through the process a couple of times, and you do have to recertify each year to say that the circumstances haven't changed. But we do have these appeals, and what we tend to reserve them for are for students that maybe have an abusive home life or have other circumstances that don't quite fit the independence questions on the application. So resources and reminders. A few things to know is each campus may have different kinds of resources that can help you overall. It's really important that you be well and healthy financially, because if you're not, it can create stress. It can have impacts on your health and on your academics. You may have heard quite a bit in the news about basic needs and college students being hungry and being concerned about where they're going to live. Always research on the individual campuses what sorts of basic needs services they have. Berkeley was one of the first in California and nationally to launch basic needs services. So we have food assistance programs, we have emergency housing deposits. We have lots of things on our campus. We have a food pantry where you can come by and pick up groceries. Lots of schools have these. And so it's just important to know what your resources are around basic needs. Here's our website, so you get a sense of what our school is like. And that can help you figure out what to ask at other institutions that you're interested in. And then what other tools are available on the campus. So for us, we have a peer program where we teach, our students teach other students about budgeting, about spending, savings, debt, credit cards, how to do all of those things responsibly, how to access things to do on the weekend for free or for cheap. And so what does the campus that you're interested in provide? For us, it's Bears for Financial Success is our program. So definitely take a look and see what other financial wellness or financial planning services your institutions have, because it is critical. It could be the first time that you're managing your own expenses. So definitely take a look at that. Reminders, apply for financial aid, apply for outside scholarships. You will do this every year. Please don't wait, start earlier, give yourself more time in case you have questions. Review the cost of attendance. Remember, that is not the most important number in your college decision. The net cost is the way that you compare school to school. That is more important than the cost of attendance. Be prepared to see loans and work in your financial aid package at public schools. Ask about how outside scholarships fit into those numbers. Remember that we can consider special circumstances. So if things have changed, because you're going to be using income information from 2 years ago, just know that we know things have changed and we can consider them. And then financial wellness is the key. We need you to be well financially while you're on our campuses so that you are successful. Okay? And that's our commitment to you. That's our job. All right. Katya, are you there? Can I turn it back over to you?
Yes, I'm here. Thank you so much for that awesome presentation. Alrighty, so it looks like we have quite a few questions in the Q&A box, and I just want to make sure that we get to them. But I also want to announce to everyone that, in order to respect your time, we understand if you want to leave at 5 o'clock exactly, if you have prior commitments, anything like that. We will be answering all these questions, and in case you're nervous about it being anonymous, we won't read out your names, so you don't have to worry about that either. And I will also choose based on, who stayed until the end. We'll be choosing a recipient for the $50 raffle prize, and we'll follow up with y'all individually through an email to get all of that set up. But thank you all so much for joining us today. Our first question for Silvia is, can I sign up for the Cal Grant when we're not freshmen?
Yes. So I encourage you to file your aid application and the GPA verification form. Even if you don't receive it in your freshman year, yes, definitely do that.
Okay, awesome, thank you. Someone else asked, what are assets?
Yeah, so I think I might have answered this as we went through. So assets are cash, savings, investments, stocks, 529 plans or investments, businesses, larger businesses, and farms with employees over 100. But in each aid application, you will find very clear definitions, property, those sorts of things.
Thank you. All right, someone else asked, and I think this might have also been answered in the presentation, but just to address it, is the cost you showed for UC Berkeley 2020 to 2021 a yearly payment, for example, $30,000 every year, or is it the total cost for all 4 years?
So what I showed you was the cost of attendance for one academic year. And really what that is it serves as a basis for us figuring out how much financial aid you need just for 1 year. Does that answer the question? Did that get to that? Okay.
Yes, it does. Thank you. And someone asked, where do we look for scholarships? Silvia, if you want to give input on this, I will also be linking the Central Valley Scholars Scholarship page, so y'all can keep an eye out for those scholarships when they open up in our new cycle. For now, you can read about our past scholarship recipients and learn more about the different scholarships we offer. Currently, we offer 3 $1,000 scholarships and an Inspire Award, and we're hoping to create new scholarships as we continue to grow. But yeah, Silvia, if you want to go ahead.
Yeah, I just flipped back to the outside scholarships page. So one place you can start is financially.berkeley.edu /scholarship-search. Is one place to start. There are lots of search engines there that will take you to other websites. Definitely one place to start for sure.
Awesome, thank you. Someone else asked, if you're applying to medical school, do we still need to fill out FAFSA?
You're applying to medical school. So I recommend that you do. You will be offered loans, but it's also really important to do your research on the school that you're applying to because they could have plenty of other money, some of which may be determined based on need. And the way that most schools determine need is using the FAFSA.
Awesome, thank you. Okay, and someone else asked, I have a self-employed parent, what documents are needed?
So self-employed parents still file a tax return. And when you file your FAFSA or your DREAM Act application for the 21-22 academic year, you're using a tax return from 2019. So please just make sure that you and your parents, if you're required to file, have completed your 2019 tax return. And that question may actually pertain to an appeal. And so parents typically have to do like quarterly taxes or do some sort of estimate before the annual one. And so typically that's helpful for us to understand how that income or the business income may have changed. But each school could be different, so do the research.
Awesome, thank you. And on sort of an unrelated note, I did want to share a link in the chat with everyone in case anyone has further questions about how to apply to FAFSA if you're from a mixed status household. This link is from federal student aid, so it's like official, and you can scroll to the bottom of the page to learn more about specifically like how to file as if you come from a mixed status household and the parents that you're listing are either undocumented or your guardian is undocumented but you are not and you're still filling out the FAFSA. So that is something super helpful. I think it has like a nice kind of step-by-step, and there's also just different scenarios in there as well for you to look at if you're still unsure about these things. So I just wanted to clarify that.
Folks consider your workshops because Central Valley Scholars has great workshops on how to fill out applications. And if you can't make those, there are others, or reach out directly to the institutions because our job is to make sure that you understand how to go through the process. Cash for College also has workshops. So there's information out there. So please avail yourself of it.
Yeah, thank you so much. And then that also leads me to my next link, which is the Central Valley Scholars workshop registration page. Please, 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 for our workshops, for our mentorships, our scholarships, all the different resources that we have to offer, please, in order to keep up, the most up-to-date information, follow us on our social medias, and also sign up for our newsletter. It's going to be, a great way of like finding out when our applications open, how you can submit them, what's needed. And of course, we'll be having more workshops as Silvia mentioned. So please check out those as well. We'll also be doing additional $50 workshops at those. If you didn't win this time, but you want to enter again, definitely check those out. All right, so there is the Central Valley Scholars workshop site. All right, I have a couple more questions in here. Okay, so do you have to count financial aid scholarships, grants, and scholarships as income or just money from your job for W-2 or W-2s?
Great question. Okay, so one caveat is I cannot give you tax advice. However, I do encourage you to use, so I'm guessing that this student is a current college student. I encourage you to use your 1098-T that tells you how much you've received in grants and scholarships and ask a tax advisor whether that is taxable income. If it is, you do include it on your tax return and it does go into your aid application. However, there is a question later in the aid application itself that asks you if any of the wages or income that you reported comes from financial aid or work study or grants and scholarships. And so your answer to that would be yes, and you want to indicate how much of your total income is from financial aid. We don't want it to count against you, and that's the purpose of that additional question. That was really weedy, but I think that that is what you were after.
Awesome, thank you. A couple of sort of questions that I have after watching this too is, I think, so I know you mentioned a really, really great point when talking about filing FAFSA when you come from a mixed status household, and the, you know, having to physically mail in that signature and concerns around like how long that might take. I was hoping if you could clarify for folks that this is what I believe, right? It's just the timestamp is what matters. So as long as they mail it out before then, but no matter how long it takes to actually get to the office, it'll still be received. Or
yeah, so it's not so much when the wet signature is processed, it's more when you've done the application and the student has signed. That's the more important date for schools. The reason I said to give yourself more time though is it's not uncommon for things to get lost in the mail, right? Your school will not be able to actually pay you any money until that gets resolved as well. So give yourself as much time as possible, but really when you complete the application, the student signs it, that's really the date that folks are looking for. But just give yourself time, print out a couple of those forms, sign a couple of them, mail one, have an extra just in case. Yeah.
And then do students have to fill that out and resend the signatures each time that they do the FAFSA or that they edit anything on there?
Yes, potentially. Yes, it's very possible, especially if you're editing parent information.
Okay, cool. And I also wanted to, I don't think that this is a question. Maybe Sylvia, correct me if I'm wrong, if this isn't across all of the, you know, across all college campuses, but for work study, do they give priorities to work study students, right? Like the recipients of work study, they're more likely to find jobs because it incentivizes those businesses or campus organizations or whatever it is to hire students. So if you qualify for that, that's just a nice little thing to know in the back of your mind, is that the likelihood of finding a work study position is high. And so, and even within that, the work study positions you get, this is just maybe from my experience, but I do think it's true that they tend to be more flexible because they know you're a student and they can't, you know, they're not going to make you work with times that interfere with your classes. So definitely check out those options too.
Yeah, definitely makes a difference because like I said, you're a student first as opposed to a campus employee. And so we do work around your schedule. We typically don't want students working more than 10 hours a week. The pay rate will vary based on where you live and where the university is. And definitely employers are looking for students with work study because there is a subsidy that they get. And so it is definitely an advantage for them as well. And certainly for our students, right, to get that experience in those areas.
Yeah, sort of a win-win. You can like make some money and also potentially get you know, relevant experience, especially on you know, college campuses. You can potentially find work study jobs that align directly with maybe the departments you're studying in or things that you're interested in.
And some schools have work study jobs on and off campus, right? So we have some that are on and off campus, and so it's always good to see what your institution offers.
Thank you. So someone asked, do you get a confirmation from FAFSA that your parents' signatures have been received?
Yes, you will get an updated confirmation once your application is processed, definitely. So keep an eye on your email, use an email address that you check regularly that you're going to continue to have access to the entire time that you're in college. So don't use your current college email address if that's not something that you're going to continue to have access to.
Someone else asked if my parent is not a U.S. citizen but is a legal resident, they still have to send that paper.
If your parent is a permanent resident, not a U.S. citizen, is that what that said? Okay. So your parent should then be able to create a federal student aid ID and sign electronically. The paper signature, the wet signature by hand, is for parents that are undocumented and so don't have a social security number. That's who that is for. But U.S. citizens and permanent residents can create an ID and sign electronically.
Awesome, thank you.
Mhm.
Alrighty, so it's 5:10. I know we still have a lot of folks who stayed until the end, so if y'all still have questions, now is the moment to enter them. Please ask your questions, otherwise I think we're good to end it here. Or do you have any closing remarks, Sylvia?
I think the one thing I would say to everyone listening is just please don't assume that you don't qualify for something, or that you can't afford to go to college, or that a community college is automatically going to be cheaper. My advice to you is to apply. Let us help figure out what you might be eligible for, and gather all of that information before you make a decision. It's better to have all of that information in front of you so you're making as informed a decision as possible. And that's what we're here to help you do.
I think that is super true. I think I've learned so much from this presentation, even as someone who is reapplying to FAFSA. Like, I've already been through this process, but things change, they look different. And it's just, yeah, I think it's very nerve-wracking, especially for folks who maybe, like folks who, don't have people to ask these questions to because they're
Right.
first gen or whatever the circumstance may be. And
Right.
with that, I highly want to encourage everyone who attended this webinar to please revisit this recording, make sure that you're reviewing it as many times as you need to, because this is very tricky information that sometimes we aren't able to get, face-to-face even, or just through our own research. I think it is very helpful to hear it from someone else who is like working in this field and is an expert on it. It's very reassuring. Also, show it to anyone who you think needs this information.
Please share.
If you have family members who need to hear this, definitely let them know as well. But I think that is all that we have for you today. I'm not seeing any more questions, so it looks like we're good to end here. Thanks everyone so much for joining us today and for engaging with Central Valley Scholars' resources. We look forward to hopefully seeing you at future events. And yeah, I think that's it. Thank you so much. And thank you, Sylvia, as well, for this wonderful presentation that you put together.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I appreciate the opportunity.
All right, have a good one. Bye.
Bye.